The Brazil that appears in beautiful photos does exist. It has music, parties, and postcard-perfect landscapes. But that's only part of the story. Behind the joy, there is an entire country trying to balance itself between broken promises, inequality, improvisation, and resistance. While some show off their fancy cars and champagne glasses, others gamble their rent and milk money at online casinos. There are girls selling themselves, foreigners entering the Amazon as if it were their backyard, politicians allied with militias, and police who kill more than they protect. There are coaches selling illusions to those who have nothing, influencers turning addiction into a lifestyle, supermarket carts overflowing for some, empty refrigerators for others. Today, Bello Mundo will show a country that is unequal, violent, corrupt, and completely abandoned. Number 1. Location and general information. Brazil is a giant country in every way. It occupies almost half of South America, has over 200 million inhabitants, and is the 5th largest country in the world in terms of territory. That alone is enough to understand the size of the challenge of governing, organizing, and developing all of this in a minimally balanced way. Most of the population lives in cities, over 80%. In other words, Brazil is urban, noisy, and crowded. There are 26 states, plus the federal district, organized into 5 large regions, each with a very different climate, culture, and social reality. In the southeast, for example, are São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, the best-known urban centers outside the country. But it is also where extremes are most evident: wealth on one side, abandonment on the other. There is no parallel to this cultural mix. There are indigenous, African, European, and Asian influences, all together. This has created a creative, warm people who know how to laugh in the midst of chaos. But they also carry centuries of inequality, structural racism, and broken promises on their shoulders. Despite being the largest economy in Latin America, poverty indicators are still reminiscent of much more fragile countries. Some people travel abroad frequently, and others have never left their own street. It's as if 2 worlds exist side by side within the same borders. Understanding this is the first step to understanding what comes next. Number 2. History. Brazil's history is full of twists and turns, but in practice, the script is usually the same. Beautiful promises in speeches, frustration in everyday life. It all started in 1500, when the Portuguese arrived in the territory and turned the region into a colony for exploitation. For centuries, the economy was driven by force, with slave labor from indigenous peoples and Africans brought there by force without any rights or wages. Slavery lasted almost 400 years, and when it was finally abolished in 1888, there was no plan in place. No inclusion, no reparations. The freed slaves were simply left behind, without land, without schools, without infrastructure. This created a social and racial divide that still exists today. The following year, the monarchy fell and a republic was proclaimed. The rhetoric was one of renewal, but power remained concentrated in the hands of a few influential families, the so-called oligarchies. During the 10th century, the country experienced moments of democracy, but also long periods of authoritarianism and coups. In 1964, the military seized power. It was the beginning of a dictatorship that lasted 21 years, marked by censorship, repression, and human rights violations. Redemocratization only came in 1985. On paper, Brazil became a modern nation, with a constitution full of rights, health, education, housing, and freedom. But between what is written and what happens in real life, there is a huge gap. To this day, many of these rights remain unfulfilled promises. Structural inequality, racism, and poor public services continue. Ultimately, Brazil changes its uniform, changes its discourse, changes its politicians. But those who live on the margins, in the suburbs, in the slums, in stilt houses, continue to wait for real change. And almost always, it doesn't come. Number 3. Poverty and inequality. They say that Brazil is not poor, it is unfair, and that phrase sums up the situation well. Here, the richest 5% earn as much as the other 95% combined. To get an idea of the extent of this inequality, in 2017, the British NGO Oxfam released a report based on Forbes magazine data on billionaires and information from Credit Suisse on the distribution of wealth in the world. The result? 6 billionaires had the same amount of money as 100 million Brazilians. That's right, 6 against 100 million. And since then, little has changed. One name leaves, another enters, but poverty continues to stare in the face of those who walk through the cities. The largest of these is Rocinha, in Rio de Janeiro, with more than 70,000 residents. It is practically a city within a city. In São Paulo, there is Paraisópolis, home to just over 58,000 people, also surrounded by wealthy neighborhoods in a striking contrast. But this scenario is not limited to the country's most famous cities. In Manaus, capital of Amazonas, in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, more than half of the population lives in areas classified as subnormal agglomerations, a technical term used by the government to refer to irregular settlements with poor infrastructure. In Amapá and in several regions of the interior of Amazonas, this proportion exceeds 1/3 of the residents. And even in Brasília, the federal capital and seat of government, there is one of the largest slums in the country, Sol Nascente, with almost 71,000 inhabitants. In all these places, the logic is similar. Makeshift buildings, failing services, many people living without any guarantee of infrastructure or stability. The contrast is cruel. On one side, luxurious buildings overlooking the sea. On the other, exposed brick houses with clandestine electrical connections and unpaved streets. Children play in alleys while their parents do informal and temporary jobs just to make ends meet. Even with some social advances, about 59 million people still live in poverty. 9 million are in extreme poverty, surviving on less than $50 a month. Most of these people are women, black people, and residents of regions far from the country's economic centers. It is a country of improvisation, of getting by to survive day after day. Number 4. Militias and organized crime. When the state fails to protect, someone else fills the void, and in Brazil, that someone is often organized crime. In some cities, especially in Rio de Janeiro, it is not the government that is in charge. It is militias, paramilitary groups formed by former police officers and public security agents who have switched sides. In the beginning, they presented themselves as protectors of poor communities, expelling drug traffickers. But they soon turned into local mafias, charging for everything: cooking gas, illegal cable TV, alternative transportation, and even house rent. If residents don't pay, punishment follows. These groups have created their own market. They invade land, build buildings without permits, sell them as if they were their own, and elect politicians to guarantee legal protection. It's called the militia real estate business. Rio de Janeiro is unfortunately the laboratory for this. 41 neighborhoods in Rio are officially controlled by militias, inhabited by more than 2 million people under the yoke of these groups, with curfews, threats, and parallel courts. The most striking case of this parallel court was that of Councilwoman Marielle Franco, who was killed in 2018 after denouncing abuses. The crime was linked to militiamen, exposing the connection between crime and power, and it's not just the militias in Rio. Criminal drug trafficking factions, such as the PCC Capital Command in São Paulo and the CV, Red Command, in Rio, also function as parallel, structured powers with hierarchies, armed armies, and influence that extends beyond prisons. The PCC, for example, has expanded its operations to virtually the entire country and even neighboring countries, controlling drug trafficking routes and committing crimes such as money laundering, bank robberies in inland cities, and many others. The portfolio is extensive. These factions often impose their own law in slums and prisons, administering justice on the fringes of the state. Although the issue of drug trafficking is better known, several films and news reports have portrayed it, the existence of militias still shocks people because of their audacity in presenting themselves as good guys while exploiting and terrorizing vulnerable populations. We can say that in certain parts of Brazil, it is not the federal government or elected representatives who call the shots, but local criminal leaders. Number 5. Violence in the capitals. If there is one dark aspect that has gained notoriety outside Brazil, it is urban violence. Large cities such as Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Salvador, and Fortaleza have been living with high crime rates and constant tension in the streets for decades. Even with a slight reduction in recent figures, the country still records tens of thousands of violent deaths every year. In 2022, there were more than 52,000. The following year, that number fell to around 46,000, the lowest since 2011. But despite the drop, the level remains very high. To give you an idea, that number of deaths exceeds the total population of many small cities in different parts of the world. Today, the Brazilian capital with the highest rate of violent deaths is Salvador, in the state of Bahia, with almost 67 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. This is more than 3 times the global average. Other capitals in the northeast region, such as Fortaleza, Recife, and Maceió, are also among the most affected. In contrast, cities such as São Paulo have managed to significantly reduce the numbers in recent years, maintaining a rate between 10 and 15 deaths per 100,000 inhabitants. Even so, more than 1,700 people lost their lives in the city in 2022 alone. Rio de Janeiro presents a more complex scenario, and many refer to both the state and the city as the Brazilian purgatory. Even without the worst rates in the country, episodes of violence are frequent, especially in the favelas. In these regions, shootouts between security forces and armed groups are part of everyday life. Many residents live in constant danger, surrounded by fear and instability. But do you know what's worse than all that? The violence doesn't just come from criminal groups. In many cases, it comes from those who are supposed to protect us. Number 6. Police violence. In Brazil, one of the hardest things to face is violence that comes from where you least expect it, the police themselves. Instead of protecting, what we often see is excessive force and, in some cases, tragedy. In 2023, more than 6,000 people lost their lives in police actions, an average of 17 per day. To compare, that is almost triple the combined average of 15 G20 countries. And it is no coincidence that around 88% of the victims were Black people living in urban peripheries. Such cases are frequent. One of the most shocking occurred in the city of São Paulo. Cameras recorded the moment when a delivery man was pushed off a bridge by police officers. The young man was unarmed, did not resist, and had no criminal record. He was just working, and yet he was treated like an enemy. In many favelas, poor, informal urban communities, the presence of the police generates the same fear as organized crime. More than half of the population says they trust the police less than they should. And when the police arrive, it is not uncommon to hear reports of aggressive stops, fatal mistakes, and threats. Police officers themselves also face constant risk, whether on the streets or in informal jobs outside of work hours. But that does not justify the lack of control. When those who are supposed to protect become a threat, the system is failing. And this is not political rhetoric. It is urgent. Reforming this is not an ideological agenda. It is a matter of survival. Number 7. Corruption and impunity. Brasilia, the capital of hope. A powerful and beautiful phrase, isn't it? That is how Juscelino Kubitschek, then president of Brazil, described the new city in 1960, when it was inaugurated to become the country's capital. Designed far from the coast and with futuristic architecture, Brasilia symbolized an attempt to turn the page in Brazil's history. But over time, this idealized image has faded. Today, for many people, the city has earned another nickname: the pizza capital. The expression is used informally when a scandal ends without real punishment, as if everything ended in agreement or silence. And this perception is no accident. Brasilia is home to the 3 branches of government: the National Congress, the Supreme Federal Court, and the Presidency of the Republic. It is there that the country's most important decisions are made, and also the main political scandals. But corruption in Brazil is not limited to the top. It starts at the bottom. It appears in small city halls and city councils, in rigged bids, in the embezzlement of school lunch funds, and in practices such as the so-called rachadinha, in which part of a public servant's salary is returned to the politician who hired them. To be perfectly honest, Brazil has seen it all. It has seen the Mensalão scandal, a scheme in which congressmen received monthly payments, a kind of allowance, in exchange for supporting the government in Congress. There was also the bloodsucker mafia, where lawmakers manipulated the purchase of overpriced ambulances in exchange for kickbacks. There were suitcases full of cash hidden in the apartments of former ministers, spreadsheets with nicknames for bribes, and even money stuffed in underwear. It was a veritable circus of horrors. Operation Car Wash, which began in 2014, for example, seemed like it was going to change everything. It revealed a billion-dollar corruption scheme involving large construction companies, powerful politicians, and state-owned companies such as Petrobras. In this case alone, the estimated embezzlement amounted to more than $8 billion, with more than $1 billion proven to have been paid in bribes. But over time, it became clear that the operation also had its own interests. Judges and prosecutors became celebrities, gained political influence, and secured a series of plea bargains. And many people began to question whether the goal was really to clean up the country or to build careers. Some decisions were considered abusive, and several convictions were overturned due to procedural flaws. Corruption here is so entrenched that it seems to function as a kind of oil in the system, lubricating schemes, accelerating advantages, diverting billions that should have gone to schools, hospitals, and housing. The worst part is not even the money that disappears. It is the example that remains. When those in charge show that they can make mistakes without consequences, the rest of the country learns to do the same. And then, as they say in Brazil, everything ends up in pizza. Number 8. Housing crisis. Having a place to live should be the bare minimum, but in Brazil, millions still live without this basic right. The housing deficit is around 6 to 7 million homes. This means people living in cramped conditions, in precarious houses, or simply on the streets. The contrast is surreal. According to the 2022 census, the country has more than 11 million empty properties. In other words, there are more vacant homes than homeless people. However, these properties are out of reach due to real estate speculation, lack of public policy, or sheer neglect. In large cities, contradictions abound. In São Paulo, for example, there are about 600,000 vacant properties, while more than 400,000 families are looking for decent housing. The result is favelas, poor, informal, self-built communities that grow in corners ignored by the state. Between 2010 and 2022, the number of favelas in Brazil doubled, from just over 6,000 to more than 12,000. There are now more than 16 million people living in cramped alleys, on stilts, houses on stilts in flooded areas, and even on dangerous hillsides. And on the streets, the most recent estimate points to 327,000 homeless people in 2024, a 25% jump in a single year. This is the harshest side of inequality. Families living in shacks, sleeping under awnings, and facing cold, violence, and abandonment. Housing is a right, not a favor. But in Brazil, it has become a privilege. Number 9. Addiction to gambling and online betting. Not all of Brazil's problems come from the past. Some Brazilian problems are very recent and digital. One of the most dangerous today is addiction to online gambling, which has become a craze in the country and is dragging many people into the abyss. Since sports betting was legalized in 2018, the betting market has exploded. Between June 2023 and June 2024 alone, Brazilians spent more than $10 billion on these games. That represents almost 1% of the country's GDP. That's a lot of money being bet, and a lot of people going broke. The appeal is strong, easy money, colorful games on your cell phone, free spins, promises of quick profits, and of course, famous influencers advertising it as if it were the most normal thing in the world. One of the most addictive is called Game of the Militias Tiger. It looks harmless with cartoon characters, but it works like a slot machine. And it's really addictive. Many people have gone into debt trying to play. It is estimated that more than 1 million Brazilians are trapped in this cycle. Some spend their entire salary trying to recover what they have lost. Some take out loans, sell what they have at home, and fall into despair. The bills simply don't add up, and when the losses arrive, they are heavy. On the other side are the influencers who promote these sites. They show off cars, trips, expensive clothes, all supposedly paid for by the little tiger. They make money by sharing links and selling the idea that gambling is a shortcut to getting rich. Meanwhile, rehabilitation clinics already treat online gambling addiction as a public health problem, and hospitals are seeing more and more cases linked to anxiety, depression, and extreme debt. The casino is no longer in Las Vegas. It's on your cell phone in your pocket, just a click away. In the end, this colorful little game has turned into a trap, and it's costing a lot. Number 10. Girls on the job. Recently, a very simple word has taken on a new meaning on Brazilian social media: job. But it's not office work, a job at a store or pharmacy or handing out flyers. When a girl says she's going to do a job, many people already know what she means: a paid date with a rich guy. It's luxury prostitution dressed up with another name and a pretty filter. Only now it's become fashionable on social media. Girls record videos of themselves putting on makeup for a job, showing off expensive dinners, designer gifts, and plane trips. Everything becomes content. Everything looks glamorous. In 2023, an ad circulated on social media calling girls to a party in Campos do Jordão, a high-end tourist town in the interior of São Paulo. It was a luxury job. The text used the term pink book, which is an old nickname for an escort. They asked for a certain standard of appearance and promised easy money, paid accommodation, and everything else at the contractor's expense. And you know what's even more curious? This type of ad appears frequently in WhatsApp groups, and no one is surprised anymore. Technically, none of this is illegal. In Brazil, prostitution is not a crime if it is voluntary and between adults. It is even officially listed by the Ministry of Labor. What the law prohibits is exploiting or pimping other people. But what is really worrying is not the criminal code. It is what lies behind it. Many girls get into it because they have no other options. Others do it for the money, the luxury, the ostentation on social media. But deep down, what they feel is pressure. Pressure to look successful, to have expensive things, to show a life that doesn't always exist in reality. Behind the high heels and expensive lipstick, there is risk. There are aggressive clients, there is harassment, there are diseases, there is silence, there is a double life. Some hide it from their families, others reveal everything on social media. But they all know they are treading on unstable ground. The job has become a way to get ahead quickly, or at least try to. But most of the time, what they have there is not freedom. It is inequality disguised as choice. Number 11. Hidden foreign presence. Everyone knows the Amazon as the lungs of the planet, but few people know what is really happening there. There is a silent dispute underway, and it is not just between illegal miners and environmentalists. There are many foreigners operating within the Brazilian forest. And what is most worrying? Often, Brazil does not know exactly what they are doing. The term internationalization of the Amazon has been called an exaggeration. But you only have to look at the facts to see that it's not theory, it's reality. There are foreign NGOs, foreign companies, and even religious missions operating directly within the Amazon territory, without government control. There are cases of organizations buying large tracts of land or making direct agreements with indigenous communities. Others set up clandestine airstrips in the middle of the forest. In 2020, the federal police discovered more than 200 of these illegal airstrips inside the forest. Some were used by miners, others were used by foreign researchers with no clear idea of what they were researching. The so-called legal Amazon, the name given to the portion of the forest that occupies about 60% of Brazil's territory, holds rare minerals, abundant fresh water, and invaluable biodiversity. It is a strategic territory and coveted. While the government opens CPIs, parliamentary inquiry committees, to investigate illegal mining, other countries have already drawn up their own maps of interest. And where the state is absent, those with money, influence, or private planes call the shots. Of course, there are serious NGOs, but there are also many opportunists acting in the vacuum. And when we talk about the Amazon, it's not just the green of the forest that's at risk, it's the green of the flag too. This is a dark side that almost no one talks about, but one that could prove very costly. Number 12. Violence against indigenous peoples and quilombolas. Many people like to say that Brazil values its origins, but for those who live in indigenous or quilombola communities, the reality is quite different. These peoples live under constant threat, and not just from land grabbers or illegal loggers. The state itself, which should protect them, often ignores, sabotages, or simply abandons them. One of the most serious cases happened to the Yanomami, one of the largest indigenous peoples in the Amazon. In 2023, the country was shocked by images of malnourished, sick children without access to food, medicine, or medical care. Their land was taken over by illegal mining. The rivers were contaminated with mercury. Hundreds died from preventable diseases, and it took the government years to react. FUNAI, the federal agency responsible for protecting indigenous peoples, has a history of omissions. Land demarcations have stalled, there is a lack of oversight and, in many cases, tolerance of invaders. Today, more than 60% of indigenous territories have not yet been officially recognized. This neglect also affects quilombolas, descendants of enslaved people who formed autonomous communities throughout history. More than 90% of these communities still do not have legal title to the land where they live. Meanwhile, companies advance, farmers invade, and land grabbers threaten, and violence increases. In the states of Maranhão and Pará, where many of these groups live, land conflicts are frequent, but they are almost never reported in the news. They do not make headlines, nor do they receive any response from the government. In everyday life, everything is lacking: schools, health clinics, roads, sanitation. It is as if these populations simply do not exist, but they are there, resisting as they always have. The country prides itself on its strong roots. But when you look closely, what you see is something else: silence, destruction, and a debt that keeps growing. Number 13. The Brazil of coaches and pyramids. In their desperation to climb the social ladder, many Brazilians have fallen into another trap: the industry of miracle coaches and pyramid schemes disguised as entrepreneurship. If before the dream was to pass a civil service exam or open a business, now it is to become a successful leader, selling self-help courses or miracle products in multi-level marketing. That's right, folks. The new promise of success in Brazil is not a civil service exam or college. It's becoming a millionaire by selling shakes or mindset courses. And many people, desperate to improve their lives, fall headlong into this wave of untrained coaches and multi-level marketing schemes, the famous pyramids, but dressed up as businesses. The formula is always seductive: financial freedom, imported cars, working from home. But the reality is quite different. More than 90% of participants in these schemes lose money. Even so, social media is full of people saying that poor people are poor because they want to be. There are financial coaches who have never owned a business, health coaches without degrees, life coaches who have never experienced anything. It sounds like a joke, but it's serious. People are giving up medical treatment and stable jobs to follow a magic formula for success. The result? Debt, frustration, emotional breakdown. And in multi-level marketing? Even worse. You buy an expensive kit, try to recruit friends, and when it doesn't work, it's your fault. The top profits, the bottom breaks, and all of this is sold as high-impact entrepreneurship. In the end, it's the old trick of exploitation, now with an aesthetic filter, motivational soundtrack, and six-figure promises. Number 14. Brazil as an international erotic destination. Little is said officially, but Brazil has long been sold abroad as a sex tourism destination. Behind the carnival, soccer, and caipirinhas, there is another image of Brazil being exported, that of an exotic sexual paradise. And it's no exaggeration. In international forums, adult tourism websites, and obscure platforms, cities like Rio, Natal, and Fortaleza are sold as complete sensual itineraries. Packages with local escorts, private parties, and accommodation included circulate in several languages. In 2023, the Ministry of Tourism removed more than 130 illegal advertisements promoting this type of experience. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. UN reports on drugs and crime have already identified Brazil as one of the countries with the highest levels of sexual exploitation of tourists. The internet has only made things worse. Today, even vacation rental platforms are used to promote parties with sexual connotations involving Brazilian women. The most serious aspect: many of these activities involve international networks, including suspected trafficking and money laundering. Meanwhile, enforcement fails, and the subject becomes taboo. Brazil's sexualized image, tanned bodies, heat, parties, did not come out of nowhere. It sells, and it continues to be fueled even by those who should be fighting it. Number 15. Misinformation and political polarization. To close this list, we cannot ignore one of the most dangerous symptoms of Brazil today: political polarization coupled with rampant misinformation. Since the 2018 elections, the country has been divided. On one side are people who believe everything they receive in their family group chats. On the other are those who distrust even proven facts. In the middle is a tired crowd trying to figure out what is real amid all the noise. In 2022, things got completely out of control. Social media was taken over by misinformation about politics, health, elections, and even the existence of the leaders themselves. Some people said that when you got the vaccine, a chip was implanted to control the population, that a satellite from Venezuela had rigged the polls. There was even a theory that the current president was actually a clone. As absurd as all this news may seem, many people believed it. The tension grew off-screen. A man was killed during his own birthday party in Foz do Iguaçu after an unknown person invaded the venue because of political differences. At the airport in Brasilia, another citizen tried to detonate a homemade bomb, claiming he wanted to prevent the president-elect from taking office. And on January 8, 2023, the most direct attack came. Radical protesters invaded the buildings of the three powers in Brasilia. An attack on the state broadcast live, which revealed how polarization was no longer just rhetoric. It became a concrete threat, as happened before in the United States with the invasion of the Capitol. But it didn't stop there. Recently, there was an even more shocking case of a suicide bomber, a man who took his own life as a political protest. A tragedy that shows the degree of delirium and radicalization. Today, more than half of the Brazilian population says they are afraid of being attacked just for saying who they voted for. The professional press has lost ground to content creators with no commitment to the truth. Reality has become a battleground, and dialogue, which used to take place at family gatherings and even at the bar, is now avoided. Conversations have turned into fights, and even jokes have become a source of tragedy. If Brazilians don't relearn how to talk to each other, there will be no democracy that can survive. And that concludes our journey through the dark side of Brazil. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to Bello Mundo, and share it with someone who needs to see Brazil beyond the postcard image. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.